Hello, and welcome to the 11th International Workshop on HIV and Aging. I'm Christine Erlinson, one of the workshop co-chairs. Our official start to the meeting will begin in a couple of hours, but we wanted to continue a new tradition that we started last year, which is to start the meeting with a chance to support our young investigators through a mentoring talk and some roundtable Meet the Expert discussions. This session is open to all investigators, young and old, and we hope that our more senior investigators can join the discussion tables as well. While we hoped that we would be doing this over breakfast, as we did last year, many of you are probably now eating lunch and some dinner, but we can still all imagine a lovely feast while we listen to some words of wisdom. We started this session last year as a way to introduce some of our new or junior investigators to leaders in the field, provide them with some encouraging words and tips in their career, before we delve into the science with our plenaries and abstracts. Following our expert, Dr. Currier's talk, we'll have a Meet the Expert roundtable discussion. These Meet the Expert discussions are listed here, and we invite everyone to join. This year, I'm extremely pleased to introduce you to Dr. Judith Currier. Dr. Currier is a professor of medicine and infectious diseases at the University of California, Los Angeles. She's the division chief for infectious diseases, the associate director for the UCLA Center for Clinical AIDS Research and Education, and she's also the chair of the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, or ACTG. Dr. Currier's research focuses on understanding the pathogenesis and management of long-term complications of HIV disease, specifically cardiovascular and metabolic complications associated with HIV treatment. Important to this talk today, Dr. Currier has served as a mentor to many investigators pursuing careers in HIV research and clinical care. Moreover, she has really served as a role model to researchers and clinicians through her expertise, level-headedness, support of junior investigators, and in particular, support of young women scientists. We are thrilled that she is able to share some of her experiences with us today. Welcome, Dr. Currier.
Good morning. Thank you so much for that kind introduction. It's really a privilege to be here today to give this talk where I'll reflect on my career in clinical research. So over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to reflect back on 30 years of clinical research in HIV and try to share some of the things that I've learned about finding your way in the world of academic medicine and clinical research, specifically related to HIV and comorbidities. By no means do I feel like I have all the answers here. And I think that the title of my talk, Driving Without a Map, reflects the fact that I had no idea what I was going to do when I started out, and by no means has my career been planned out from the beginning. I think many of you who are starting out feel this need to have everything mapped out, and I hope that my comments today show how unpredictable life is and where it will take you, and particularly in research, but that's probably one of the best things about it, is that you don't know where you're going to end up when you start. So I want to go back to the beginning of HIV, because for me, that was the beginning of my career. When the first cases of AIDS were described in Los Angeles, I wasn't in Los Angeles, and in fact, I was in medical school at the time. And I had a professor of microbiology named Elmer Pfefferkorn, shown here in the picture, who made us read the MMWR every week in medical school, and told us that this is where we would learn about the most interesting things that were happening in the world. And hearing about these first cases of HIV, I was really curious about what this would mean, but had no idea at the time how much it would impact my life. I went on to do a residency in internal medicine in Boston in 1985 after graduating from medical school. And in those early years of residency, we're really at the peak of the HIV epidemic in the US, where we had no treatment. And the mortality rate was incredibly high. Our focus was on basically helping people survive each hospitalization. And it was a really challenging time, but it was where I saw the value and importance of therapeutic clinical research. And I think that one of the first lessons that I learned was to find inspiration really from the people and the places around you, and to let that inspiration guide you. And I think if there's one thing that has been at the core of what's informed my development and my research over the years, it's been the patients that I've taken care of, who've really helped me to see the important questions that we need to answer, and also provided the motivation to do so. And one of the first patients I cared for as a resident was Bob Sappenfield. He gave his permission to be photographed by Nicholas Nixon throughout his journey of living with HIV and AIDS, was diagnosed with cryptococcal meningitis in 1988. And at that time, we had no clear treatment other than amphotericin. And I got involved in a clinical trial and expanded access, actually, with fluconazole to give him the opportunity to have an alternative treatment to amphotericin, which was incredibly challenging over the long term. And remember, this is before we had antiretroviral therapy that was really effective, so people remained on treatment really indefinitely. But it was really through that experience of participating in a clinical study that I became really interested in therapeutics and in evaluating the activity of new treatments. The first study demonstrating the efficacy of AZT caught my attention, and I wanted to figure out really how I could be involved in this kind of research. And one of the early things that I learned was the importance of having formal training in biostatistics and clinical epidemiology. And so during my fellowship in infectious diseases, I got a master's in epidemiology and participated in a training program in clinical research. And it was a really important way of developing a skill set, so that as I wanted to be more involved in the clinical research, I felt like I needed to have something to bring to the table, in addition to just the really important, obviously, clinical experience of taking care of patients. So I completed a master's of clinical research in epidemiology during my fellowship, and then went on to start my first position after that. But the other thing that was really important and very influential to me early in my career was recognizing the importance of interacting and understanding the concerns of people living with HIV. I think that our field has led the way in this respect, but the collaboration between researchers and people living with HIV have had such a major impact on the direction of the research that we do, and on how we prioritize research, and have been integrated in research throughout the whole time. And this is really had an impact on me, and I think the value of this is really something that I continue to appreciate every day. So unfortunately, my patient did not do well over just a few years with the cryptococcal meningitis. That he eventually developed PML, the brain infection, and succumbed to it. But through taking care of him, and I learned really the need to find treatments, obviously, for HIV, and also to understand. At that time, I was focused more on co-infections with HIV than comorbidities, but it really started me out in wanting to be involved in HIV treatment, and has continued to influence me really to this day. And I think one of the quotes that I love is, "The secret is to gang up on the problem rather than each other." And within the world of academic medicine and clinical research, there certainly is a lot of competition. But I think what I have seen and what's really made me remain interested and really appreciative of people in infectious diseases is our collaboration and ability to work together. And I found that, the kind of work I wanted to do was not the kind of work that you could do by yourself. And so forming collaborations with other people, learning from each other, and approaching this from a team science perspective has been incredibly valuable. So one of the main groups that I've worked with my entire career has been the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, and this was started in 1987. Is an alliance of academic, industry, and government investigators working together in partnership with community representatives. It's been funded by the National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases and other collaborating institutes. For me, this was an opportunity early in my career to get involved in clinical research and to have opportunities to work with people really around the country and eventually around the world. Early in my career, I was not told, I didn't have anyone who was telling me do this and don't do that. But there was a sense of that working with a network or a large group like this, that you would be lost, and that it was very hard to have any major impact as an individual because everything was done as a group, and that this kind of group would just take all of your energy away and you would never accomplish anything. And I feel like there's so many opportunities for young investigators within these collaborative groups. And it's not necessarily starting out being in charge of a large trial, but there's a tremendous amount of data that's available that can be analyzed. And that's how I started out, was really doing secondary data analysis. So my first involvement in the ACTG, it was in the early 1990s, where I was interested in women in HIV and enrollment of women in clinical trials. And I worked on an analysis called Women in Power. And it was really focused on understanding how many women, or what proportion of women we needed to enroll in our trials to be able to do analyses of sex differences on the outcomes. And particularly, I was interested in sex differences in adverse events and toxicity of treatment, as well as in efficacy. So we were, the ACTG was starting a large trial comparing different monotherapy and combination therapy nucleoside treatments. And I wanted to look at what proportion of women we needed to enroll to be able to see a difference in outcome. So my abstract for the Amsterdam AIDS conference in 1992 was called Women in Power. And it ended up being accepted. The meeting was actually moved to Boston. But it was accepted, and I was put on a panel with several women from around the world talking about women in power and gender equality. And I was a little bit like a fish out of water with this incredible group of very powerful and articulate spokespeople. But I think it was a great opportunity for me to realize that, as a scientist, there are also other issues about gender equality that we need to integrate into science. So that was the start of my academic career. And I think that messages start kind of by doing what's necessary. So for me, it was working in a clinical setting and being involved in enrolling and following participants on clinical studies. And while I wasn't leading any studies, I was trying to identify kind of where my interests were by being involved in secondary analyses and completed data. And because of my training, I had an ability to, help design this kind of work. And what it provided for me was basically hypothesis generating ideas from secondary data, but also finding collaborators, meeting other people who were interested in some of these ideas, and really harnessing the power of these data repositories. as eventually for me, this led to the submission of new proposals and my own grants. I never had a K23 or K08 award at the beginning of my career, but subsequently I was able to be funded through something called the K24, which is a mid-career award for mentoring and clinical research. The second sort of message that I would share about career development is that the timing is never going to be right. And this is the idea that you sometimes have to grab opportunities when they arise. This kind of fits into thinking about how you can not actually map out a career plan, driving without a map. So I was working in Boston. I was very happy with the work I was doing. I had great collaborators. I had a lot of opportunities. And then a new opportunity came up to move to the West Coast. It was not something that I had been planning. Right at the same time that I was offered a position as the medical director of the LA County USC clinic, 5P21. I found out I was pregnant with my first child, and it was probably the worst possible time to take a new job, but I did, and it was the best thing I ever did. And I moved to LA County USC in 1993, and I call it a house of cards at that time because it was really at the peak of the worst of HIV. But this was an incredible clinic that was offering HIV treatment to a population that had limited resources and high rates of morbidity from HIV. And it was a time to really be able to work in HIV in a well-organized setting and conduct research to try to have an impact. So in the long history of humankind and animal kind too, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. And I feel like the HIV research community did this at that time by organizing studies to evaluate new treatments. The combination antiretroviral therapy that really emerged in the mid-1990s, 1996 and 97 with protease inhibitors and nucleoside analogs, really, along with prophylaxis for opportunistic infections, had a major impact on the mortality of HIV. And it was really an incredible experience to see this unfold, really in front of our eyes over a few years. So at that time, I think that, you know, the lessons that I learned were to do your work and find your people, and trying to really identify developing skills, obviously in initiating projects. But then a really important lesson I learned was you've got to finish your projects and you've got to publish your work. And I learned this the hard way. I was involved in probably too many things, and some things didn't get finished and didn't get published. And so when people were evaluating you as a researcher, that the real currency that is used is your publication record, for right or for wrong. When people are looking for someone to collaborate with on an issue, they often will look to PubMed and see who's published on that and whether that would be a good person. And I was at a stage where I had a lot of things that I had started, but I hadn't finished and published them. And I was working, you know, in a very, very busy clinical setting where most of my time to complete research was at night and on the weekends. And so that was really challenging for me. I learned from peer mentors that I met some of the ways that they had been successful in getting their work done and carving out time and negotiating for more protected time to be able to focus on their career. And I also learned, sort of home and away, that by working through a group like the AIDS Clinical Trials Group or any other large collaborative group, you end up meeting people from other institutions who can serve really effectively as mentors for you. And I think meetings such as this one, if we were there in person, I think one of the things that we're losing is the ability to actually interact with people one-on-one, to talk to them about your poster, to hear about their work. and to learn about opportunities to possibly collaborate in the future. So at this time, as we saw the incredible improvements in outcome of HIV from the 1993 to 98, while I was at LA County USC, I had the opportunity to move to UCLA to take a position that was much more focused on research with more protected time. And this is when I was submitting my K-24 grant, which provided 50% support for protected time. And I was offered a research position at UCLA. It was a very, very hard decision to move from a setting where I really enjoyed the clinical work to one that would be more focused on research. But in retrospect, it was a decision that I'm glad that I made. But these types of decisions about moving during your career are really not easy. And being able to have trusted mentors and peer mentors that you can discuss the pros and cons with, in addition to your friends and family, are just really critically important. So I went to UCLA in 1998, and I sort of, this part of my career, I call it, we don't know what we don't know. And this is when we were really starting to understand some of the complications associated with HIV treatment and the toxicity of HIV therapy. And I think that I had the opportunity there to start collaborating more with some laboratory-based scientists and others. And it was a really important point in the whole field of HIV-related comorbidities. So at that time, we were focused on, could we stop opportunistic infection prophylaxis? I had been focused mostly on OI treatment early on. Newer studies of ART, and then this area of emerging complications of ART and HIV. And this is when I began to explore work on cardiovascular disease and HIV, on fat changes, and then a theme that's continued throughout my career has been looking at sex differences in HIV. And I also, at that time, got involved a little bit more into work on antiretroviral therapy in pregnancy with a focus on maternal health as it relates to perinatal transmission. So if somebody was kind of doing a, autopsy on a career development plan, they might look at this and say, wow, there's just too much going on here. This is all over the map. You need to really focus. And I think in retrospect, I think that is good advice. But at this time, there were many kind of related things emerging at the same time. And I had, the opportunity to continue to explore them because I had a fair amount of protected time and a very limited administrative role at that point in my career. So I was really lucky to be able to kind of follow a couple of different threads, all under the umbrella of improving the outcomes of people living with HIV. But this idea that you both need to find a focus, but then think about what comes next, is you're focused on what you're doing now, and then thinking about what you might do in the future. I think throughout this time, what really resonated with me was trying to keep abreast with what were really the most important issues for people living with HIV. What were the concerns and what were the unknowns? The 2000 AIDS conference in Durban was a pivotal time for many of us, really fully appreciating the global pandemic and the lack of impact that we've been able to have as we were beginning to find effective therapies. Nkosi Johnson gave a speech at that conference as a young boy, and he said, do all you can with what you have, in the time you have, in the place you are. And I think that's really just incredible advice to all of us. After the AIDS conference in 2000, I did get involved in studies of perinatal transmission and looking at the impact of prior receipt of single-dose nevirapine working with the incredible Shaheen Lockman, who was a new investigator at the time, was really an honor to be involved in the study to demonstrate the unintended consequences of the first treatments for prevention of perinatal transmission. And at this time, the AIDS Clinical Trials Group after 2000 expanded around the globe to include international sites, and it really launched an agenda across therapeutics and complications that extended around the world. And I think it's been a really important advance in our understanding and our ability to have an impact on HIV. And I was really pleased to be involved in helping to expand the HIV into, the ACTG into international settings and work with the amazing investigators who are in those settings. At this time, I did take on a greater role, administrative role in the AIDS Clinical Trials Group, the agenda of which is shown on this slide. I was involved in the complications of HIV research agenda committee, and then became involved in the scientific agenda steering committee, and then became the vice chair of the network, and now have become the chair, and it's been really an incredible opportunity to be involved in the leadership of this group of amazing individuals from around the world who work together to find effective treatments for HIV and related complications. I think in retrospect, thinking about looking back over my career, I love this quote from Edith Wharton, who says, there are two ways of spreading light, to be the candle or the mirror that reflects it. And one of my greatest joys in my career has been to mentor young investigators and work with people as their careers develop. And the amount of energy and the new ideas and the new ways of doing things that I've learned from my mentees has been just really had a major impact on me. And I think that being involved as a mentor is a really great way to fully expand your own reach, but also to be influenced by so many other people. So if I kind of look back and say, you know, what are the lessons that I've learned? What would I share as for people who are trying to figure out how to navigate this life in clinical investigation, and particularly in HIV, to find inspiration from the people around you and to let it guide you, and to recognize the timing for making decisions about what you're going to do or where you're going to be is never going to be right, and you need to grab opportunities when they arise. You looking for mentorship just beyond your own home institution, I think, is an important lesson to learn, and hopefully we will have conferences in person again, and people will have opportunities to meet in person. I think finding a focus and developing skills is important, and then just continuing to look ahead as to what comes next. I think it's always good to have sort of projects in different states of gestation, from the concept of ideas that you're thinking about doing to things that have been initiated to things that you're finishing up, to kind of manage that, always keep you moving forward and into new areas. But I think the most important thing is really to make time to enjoy life along the way. And I've been so fortunate throughout my career to just work with the most amazing people. And I've been able to enjoy the work really at every stage. When you're working hard, if you're enjoying yourself, then it's not hard work. And I think in the field of HIV in particular, we're so lucky to have such amazing people who've come to this field, and I find that I learn learn so much from others that it makes it all worthwhile. I just want to acknowledge a few of my mentees and collaborators across the years. I think that what's so great about working in the area of HIV and comorbidities has been working with people from different subspecialties and being able to explore together with them the impacts of different diseases. And I've just really been fortunate to have a lot of great collaborators over the years, or people that have inspired and driven me to work harder, and that makes it all worthwhile. And then most importantly, though, having support from my family has also been incredibly valuable. And I do take advantage of opportunities to get outside and do other things besides work. And I think that that's one of the most important things for maintaining your sanity and being able to keep doing this for year after year. So I'm happy to answer questions, and I really appreciate the opportunity to share these reflections about working in clinical research in HIV over the last 30 years. So thank you very much.